Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, where today we are going to be doing my June end of month wrap up, where we talk about everything that I read in the last 2 weeks of June. If you are interested in what I read in the first 2 weeks of June, I will go ahead and leave my mid-month wrap up down below. But let's go ahead and just jump right in and start with the DNF. So this is Phoenix Rising by Pip Ballantine and T. Morris. And this is the first book in a adult steampunk series, and we're following our main character of Books. Well, Books and Braun. So Books is the head archivist at the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences. Braun is a field agent for that same ministry, and they end up partnered together. They find a mystery and start investigating it, and the story kind of goes from there. And I DNF'd this at page 50 because I realized I'm just not really into steampunk anymore. So in general, for steampunk, I don't love the writing style. I don't love the tropes. Frequently, the characters are hit or miss. And in this particular volume, it needed some editing because there were some glaring typos. And so I just decided to go ahead and DNF it. After that, I picked up Archie Volume 4, and then later in the month, I picked up Archie Volumes 5 and 6 to finish out the series by Mark Waid. So this is a modernization of the old Archie comics, which, if you don't know, follows the main character of Archie Andrews and his best friend Jughead and his other two friends and sometimes girlfriends, Betty and Veronica. So this, I thought, was an excellent modernization. So Mark Waid had a really good understanding of what made the old Archie comics good and kept that and figured out how to integrate it in this modernized comic. And I thought that that was done really, really well. I also like that we really had explored some of the cause and effect in the plot lines. Like, that seems really basic, right? But sometimes, especially in comics, you'll have an event happen and it should have like widespread effects on people, and you just don't see that. But I thought that this one did pretty well with that. I generally liked the plots of the individual volumes, although they are a little bit high school drama for me. I've kind of figured out that I'm just not into that so much anymore. And I did find that the last volume, volume 6, it did everything it needed to do to be an ending, but I just found it kind of lackluster. And I'm not really sure what would have made it better, but it just wasn't that. So the 3 volumes that I read, I gave between 3 and 3.5 stars to all of them, and the series as a whole, I ended up giving 3.5 stars to. After that, I read Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Q. Sutanto, and this is an adult contemporary, like, family comedy kind of book. And we are following our main character of Medi, who gets set up on a blind date, and at the end of the date accidentally kills the person. And so she goes to her mom for help. Her mom calls her Aunties, and then in the course of trying to deal with this dead body, they accidentally send it to the wedding venue that they're all working the next day. And so we get to follow them as they try to figure out how to keep this dead body secret, as well as how do you dispose of it. And the story kind of goes from there. Now, I have already done a full-length review for this particular book. I will leave it linked down below, and I will keep this relatively short, but I really did like this. I thought that the family dynamic between Medi and her mom and her aunts it was very well done. It had very much that I love you, but you annoy me, but I love you. And so I really thought that that was good. The plot itself I found to be, yes, ridiculous on one level, but so fun and engaging. Like, I ended up staying up until 1:30 in the morning to finish this book because I was having such a good time with it. I will say that I found the characters to be a little bit bland, which was unfortunate because it really meant that the romantic subplot that is in this book kind of fell flat for me, because like I didn't feel like the couple really had any chemistry. But it was okay because it was a subplot anyway. And I will say that some people have been saying this is a romance, and it's not a romance. It definitely feels like that in the beginning because of how the structure of the book is. It feels like we're setting up to a romance, but it's not a romance. So just go in knowing all of that. But I really liked this, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. After that, I read Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. And this is the first book in a fantasy trilogy, and we are following our main character of Sanchia, who is a thief. And she steals this object at the request of somebody else, only to discover that it is a very powerful magical object that in the wrong hands would cause quite a bit of devastation. And so she decides to not turn it over to her client, but keep it for herself and then go on the run. And while she's on the run, she kind of falls in with this ragtag group of people, and the story goes from there. So, it is not up yet, but I have already filmed a full-length review for this. So also with this one, I will keep it pretty light, but I did not like this. We're just going to say that. I found that there were a lot of issues. The world building felt like it had holes in it. I thought that the magic system was really interesting, but I didn't like that we were constantly looking for loopholes to subvert those rules. And if you could find them, you kind of were like all powerful. All the characters were pretty bland. I thought the pacing was all over the place. There was very little plot for the vast majority of this book. I could go on. There's a lot that was just not well executed, and that's kind of what I found. This is a book that had really interesting ideas that for me were very poorly executed, and I ended up giving this 3 stars. After that, I read Black Widow, Shield's Most Wanted, and Black Widow, No More Secrets by Mark Waid. This is a 2-volume run about obviously Black Widow, but essentially someone is blackmailing her to get her to try to turn on S.H.I.E.L.D. to some extent, and she decides to use her vast intellect to try to track down this person and figure out, you know, what they have and why they're doing this, and also protect the higher ups at S.H.I.E.L.D. And I did not love this either. So, like, there's not a ton of dialogue in this. There's actually not a ton of plot. It's a very straightforward plot. It is very action heavy, which for me personally is a little bit harder to follow, especially in superhero comics, because that action tends to be fighting, and it's hard to tell what's going on, especially in the second volume where in the fights, some of the combatants look very similar to each other. So I could always get the gist of it, but like the fine details were kind of a blur. And of course, this was made even more difficult because the coloring on this was it heavily favored red and red tones, and so that made it a little bit more difficult to pick out what was going on as well. And then that plot I found to be just kind of lackluster. Like I thought that the concept was interesting, but again, execution made it a little bit lackluster. And at the end, Black Widow is giving this speech of sorts, sort of, but everything she was saying was a little bit hokey and didn't really feel like Black Widow to me. So I don't think it was outright wrong, but it definitely felt off, and I didn't really appreciate it. So I ended up giving the individual volumes 3 stars each, but the series as a whole 2.75. And then after that, we have the next DNF on my list, and that is The Blade Itself by Jo Abercrombie, the first book in the First Law trilogy. So this is an adult fantasy trilogy, and this first book doesn't really have an overarching plot. We're basically following a handful of characters as they live their lives, and I'm assuming at the end their lives end up intersecting in some kind of meaningful way. I don't know. I didn't get that far. I actually DNF'd this at page 249, which is just shy of halfway. Part of the problem is that It didn't have a discernible plot. We were following these characters as they live their lives, and we're doing things that I'm sure are going to be important later, but it was really difficult for me to keep a hold of a lot of the details because I didn't understand how they were fitting into the big picture, and so I just had problems remembering them. Additionally, I didn't love any of the characters. There were a couple that I liked well enough, like I liked Logan Ninefingers, and I thought Inquisitor Glocta was interesting. I thought Jezzel was a gigantic tool. and those were all perspective characters, by the way. And then we just introduced Pharaoh, who I think is going to also be another perspective character. And Pharaoh didn't do anything for me either. So, and then if you add in the fact that the world building details were pretty sporadic, this just didn't work for me. I just didn't care. And so I got to about that halfway point, 249, and I talked to my spouse who has actually fully read this trilogy. This is actually his. And through the conversation, he advised me that if I'm not planning on reading the trilogy anyway, the things that I care about are not going to be the things that I'm going to see at the end of this novel, so I might as well just DNF it anyway. So I went ahead and did that. After that, I picked up Supergirl Being Super by Mariko Tamaki and Joelle Jones. I think it was illustrated by Joelle Jones. And this is a 4-issue run for Supergirl that is just an origin story. So we're following Kara Danvers. Kara? You guys, I never remember how to pronounce her first name. So we're following Supergirl before she's Supergirl as she is at high school, and she's going through high school trying to live her life. She understands she has superpowers. She has no idea why. And then this kind of event happens that seems to be supernatural in nature, and everything kind of explodes in her life. And the story goes from there. Now, I found this to be a really solid, highly enjoyable origin story. I don't think it was like super amazing, but I think it was really just generally well done. I liked Kara. And I liked her characterization. I liked her family. I liked her friends. Just generally how we moved through the story very quickly. Like, I just thought it was very well paced. The illustrations were well done. I could actually follow what was going on in them. And so just generally, I thought this was very well done. There was one plot point that I'm not convinced was necessary, and it's kind of a big deal because it's one of those things that, like, we should be examined closely, especially because if Kara was a male, we would definitely have something to say about that particular event. Like, I just don't think it did anything. I don't think it added anything to the plot, so I'm not convinced it was necessary. But I mean, that's like the one thing that I really had a problem with, so I ended up giving this 4 stars. After that, I picked up Marvel 1602 by Neil Gaiman, and this is an 8-issue run, and it's really what it sounds like. It's Marvel superheroes set in the year 1602, and like, that sounded really, really interesting to me when I first saw it, but I picked this up and I read the first issue and I realized this is just not for me, and so I ended up DNFing this. Basically, the art was good, but it wasn't my preference. The plotline seemed interesting, but it also seemed like it was going to be really detailed, and I was struggling with some of the details because I wasn't recognizing all the different Marvel characters, because I have watched the Marvel movies, not like the X-Men, but MCU movies, but I don't read the comics. When I read comics, it's generally DC, and so I didn't recognize like half of the characters that we were introduced to. And so it made it really difficult to kind of figure out I didn't understand what was going on quite as well. And when I got to the end of the first issue, I realized, like, yes, I could probably read this and figure it out and enjoy it well enough, but it probably wasn't going to be much higher than a 3-star read for me. And like, why bother? I wasn't interested enough in it to kind of continue. So I just did go ahead and DNF it. This is not to say anything against the quality, just that it just wasn't for me. And then lastly, I read In the Hall with the Knife by Diana Peterfreund, the first book in the Clue Mystery series. So this is a YA reimagining of the Clue board game. Although it's very clearly also got some homage to the movie, which is lovely. But basically we are set at this boarding school in Maine, and there is kind of like a freak snowstorm, sleet storm, ice storm. I'm not really entirely certain. It's winter weather, and it catches some of the students and some faculty off guard, and they all end up in this one mansion together riding out this storm. And then somebody is murdered, and they have to figure out who done it before they do it again. And the story goes from there. This was so much fun. Now, I love the original movie, the Clue movie from the 80s. It's so much fun. And I found very lovely little touches in this book that just made me so, so happy. I did think it was a little bit over dramatic, but that's very much in keeping with the movie, so definitely gave it a pass on that. I thought the murder mystery was decent, but I was really focused on like figuring out all the secrets for the students. Like, I was guessing like what their secrets could possibly be, because all of them have some major secrets, and we didn't even find out all of them. There's a couple of characters we didn't even get hints as to what their secret is. Well, other than like very surface level hints. And you can just tell that even the people that we kind of got more information about their secrets, like, there's still more. You can tell there's still more. So I'm very excited for the next book in the series because I want to know all of it. But generally speaking, I just found this to be incredibly enjoyable. If you liked the movie, if you like YA, this is probably going to be right up your alley. But I ended up giving this 4 stars. And that is it. That's everything that I read or DNF'd in the last 2 weeks of June. Leave me comments down below. Let me know what you read. Let me know if you have any thoughts or feelings about what I read. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!